This is episode 13 of RV Dream Makers, and in this episode we're still in Sedona. We only go a couple miles from our boondocking location, and we went to what's called the Palatki ruins, or Native American ruins, and we went on a little tour with a couple different guides. We went in their museum for a little bit. It was really interesting. If you really listen closely to some of the stuff they said, I thought the most interesting thing was how they built their adobe ruins, or well, they weren't ruins then, their homes, to where they were in the sun in the winter to keep them warm for 8 hours a day. But in the summer, when it's hot, they were only 4 hours a day in the sun. They strategically figured out how to do that toward a certain rock, and it was really, really neat. You know, you don't think of them thinking of detailed oriented stuff like that, which is really smart to keep from getting too hot or too cold.
And it's free. We just had to make a reservation.
Yeah.
So, and last year it was closed. They just now reopened up because of COVID, they said. And so last year when we were in Sedona, it always said it was closed. But this time it's open, but you do have to make a reservation, but it is free. And I highly recommend it because it was very interesting. That's why I have a lot of what he was saying on here. And I had to bump up the volume because you couldn't hear him very well. So like if we talk or when people come by, it seems extremely loud. It's because I had to bump up the volume so that you could hear him, but I felt like what he was saying was pretty interesting, so I wanted you to be able to hear it.
Okay, we hope you enjoy this episode.
We're chasing the easy life. We're chasing the easy life. We're chasing the easy life. We're chasing the sun tonight. We're chasing the
How do you pronounce this?
I have no idea.
Palatki?
We probably need to ask before we start.
Palatki ruins. Well, look at this. I guess that's what you got to climb up to. See, that's the adobe rock like we had back in there, I guess. 1/10 of a mile isn't very far, so we'll probably be able to see it, maybe.
They don't even want you to.
Okay, this is the Palatki. We're in the visitor center right now looking at some of the stuff they found here. We're going to be going on a tour here in a little bit. Those fiber sandals. Yucca sandals.
They make so much out of yucca and agave.
All the bones they use from stuff they kill. That looks like a part of a bow they use. Oh no, it's slung on something. It's weird.
Like an arrow that you swung around and threw.
And how many people are in your party?
Wow.
One.
It's an arrow too.
House in Hopi, and they tell him Palatki, and that's how this place got its name. Right? So we think it's like this beautiful Native American thing and this culturally rich names, and they end up to be conveniences. And that's the best we can do right now. Everything else that we're going to do has a little bit of science involved, so that makes it a little bit easier for us to describe. Okay? We're going to go through one of these rocks on the bottom of the cliff. You'll notice the very tall green tree against the cliff bottom, right smack dab in the middle. I'm pointing at it.
I see it.
To the left from that very tall green tree, you'll see the bricks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's what I'm looking for, the overall sense of what we know and what we don't know. Honestly, when it comes to Native American history, we lack severely. And the reason for that is that they have no written history. Native Americans had no alphabet. They have no letters, pencils. They didn't write anything down. Everything was passed down through oral tradition from century to generation to generation. Sadly, mostly in the 1900s, much of the culture of the Native Americans has been eliminated through assimilation. And so many of those stories are gone. And actually much of it is gone. And ultimately, we do have to do a whole lot of guesswork. And by the way, it's not only affecting us, it's also affecting the tribes. They don't know their own past. So it's an interesting challenge for all of us to show you a place like this, because we have to be careful about not giving things meaning that isn't true, for example. We try to avoid interpretation, generally speaking, because we don't know the history of the people and we don't know what the images mean on the wall. So we're not going to tell you something means something without actually having done some science on it to understand it. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
So what you're going to see today, this place is it's called a heritage site because it's one of the only places in this entire valley where we continue to do archaeological work because it's completely unrestored in any way. That's what separates this from, say, Montezuma's Well and Montezuma's Castle, which are both restored. They're more like museums for you guys, whereas here we can continue to do papers, continue to do science, and we actually have 2 papers in progress right now, which you'll hear about today.
Do you have your bucket?
Bye. So that's what makes this place so special, but it's also why we protect it so closely, because we can still do science here. The first thing you're going to see is a 1,000-year-old dwelling. That's our modern history here, okay? That is what we assign to the Sinagwin people. So as I tell you things like a name like Sinagwin, what you need to understand is that it's not accurate. It's a name we give them out of convenience because, again, these people had no written history. We don't know what they call themselves. The only names that we find for most of the tribes comes from the Spanish. So the Sinagwin's a perfect example of that. Actually, it means when they found these people living in dry climate against the mountains, what we now call the San Francisco Peaks, they decided to call them the people who live without water. In Espanol, sin agua. And that's what they wrote down in their books because the Spanish were all about missionaries and coming back and converting people to Catholicism. So they wrote everything down and kept very good records. And the only name that we have to associate with these people is Sinagwin, even though it is not accurate. The tribes don't know what they were called back in those days either. So that's what we go with for today. Maybe someday we'll discover some new information. The beautiful thing about archaeology is that we have to be flexible. Our dates are always changing because of new discoveries daily. So you have to be sort of understanding when we give you dates, we're talking about ranges, we're not talking about specifics. Okay? All right, let's go. What's that? It's basically a 2-story building with 5 rooms downstairs and a storage space out to the right and 3 rooms upstairs. Okay? You're going to be standing 10 feet away from it in a moment. But I'd just like you to see it, again, in context.
Go right ahead.
I think it's not with you for 10 minutes at least. So.
Yeah, most of this fall down, didn't it?
This is probably the fence on the hill that I saw. I didn't even pay attention to that.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way you could see that.
I'll pay the insurance for that too. Come on up, you guys. Welcome up to our little Palatki red house. So, what an amazing building, right? So, 1895, Jesse Fuchs discovers the property. He takes a photograph from that berm of rock right over there, shooting this way at the building. We took a photograph, I think in 2003, from the exact same position. And we overlapped the 2 photographs, and not one rock in the construction of this building had moved in 120 years. So we really know we have something special here. I hear our archaeologist raving. He says this is one of the best things that we can work on because it's so amazingly in the natural and still exists here. Part of the reason it's still here, you guys, is this spot was actually scouted. They didn't choose this spot by mistake. If you look up, it never gets wet here. The drip line's about 20 feet down the hill. So that's part of the reason it's still here. Also, in the wintertime, it gets 8 hours of full sun. In the summertime, only 4 hours of full sun. So they really knew what they were doing. The word I like to use for the Sinagwins is sophisticated. We tend to think of early people as being simple. You have to let that story go completely. Because there's no way you can have a society work for 800 years like the Sinagwins did without having a certain level of sophistication to make that happen. So ultimately, it's something you have to think about with this stuff. So the house was actually built, when we first took over, the Forest Service did 2 repairs to the building. As I said, it's not restored, but we didn't want it to fall down. So we repaired a little bit of mortar right here to keep this section from falling down. We put a little bit of mortar underneath these 2 big rocks to keep them from sliding down. And we replaced this one header right here, okay? And the reason we replaced the header was not because it was broken, but because it's an amazing source of science. So what happened was, by removing that one log, okay, we discovered that the log dated to 1024 AD. So it informs us as to when the building was basically constructed and assembled, but we were also able to do the dendrochronology, which is the reading of the tree rings in the log, to get a firm understanding of what the climate was like up to the date that that tree was cut down. And so that's why we feel pretty comfortable saying that it was cooler and wetter back in Sinagua times, okay? And that's what made it possible for them to have all this agriculture happening in this valley for that length of time. We also believe that they probably left this because of water as well, or lack thereof, okay? So, Sinaguan people, buildings down 1100 AD. I believe that that building was built first. That's our western alcove. That building had 5 rooms in it. One room was a larger space, 25 by 25 feet, with benches along the walls, probably used for some communal purposes. Some people like to assign religious meaning. I tend to stay away from words like kiva because I don't know. So I'll just call it a communal space where people would meet to talk. Leave it at that. The smaller rooms were probably all dwelling spaces. This is 8 rooms, 5 rooms downstairs, 3 rooms upstairs. Basically 3 to 5 people per room as far as dwelling goes. So maybe between the 2 buildings, 30 to 80 people, 50 to 80 people in that range at any one given time of people up here. So, how was the building built? You can see when you look over there how they attached the wall to the cliff face. So the cliff face is an integral part of the building, okay? The first room here, room number 1, didn't appear to have a doorway. And because the ceilings had already fallen in, my guess is when they first started to build these buildings, they were taking the techniques they understood from below in their pit house development. Do you guys know what pit houses are? Native American people, before they built these structures on the hills, lived in these oval buildings that were partially underground, partially above ground. They basically had clay roofs that were on an angle with a small hole at the top. Okay, and they would climb a ladder on their firm clay roofs, down a ladder into their place, and that was also their chimney for their smoke to get out from their fires. And so this room and this room appear that they must have had ceiling access, roof access. Understanding that every room in this culture has a nice thick roof on it, generally about 1 foot thick. It's got logs about 10 inches in diameter that go from the cliff face into the bricks. Then they have smaller logs about 4 inches in diameter that are going perpendicular to those. And if you look inside this little doorway right here, you see the smaller holes for the cross beams. And then they would take vegetation on top of that, bare grass, whatever was available. And then they would take this mortar, the same mortar that you see on the walls here, and they would press it onto the ceiling to have a beautiful hard roof. By the way, while we're talking about the mortar, the magic of this building for me are these fingers. Look at the fingers in the mortar, you guys. I think that's the special part of this building, honestly. It's the human connection to it that we can make very quickly, seeing those 1,000-year-old fingerprints in the mud. I can just imagine people working as a team, digging into a bucket of mud and slapping it into the wall, and that's what's left. I think that's pretty special stuff. So, rooms 1 and 2 seem to be following the same pattern of sort of maybe copying the pit house concept. But by the time we get to room number 3, we can see the change. We start to get these, I think they're called videos, but that's not the right word. It'll come to me. Header, for lack of a better word. All these other headers, by the way, are 1,000-year-old pieces of wood. All right, just understand that this stuff is still going strong. So what happened by the time they got to room number 3 was they probably knew they were going to go 2 stories. You couldn't enter your room from above because somebody's living above. So now you have to have a doorway that's accessible from the outside. And so we start to see these doorways happen. And they're happening all over the place in this valley. So it's interesting to see that sort of progression of thought and capabilities. It's not a big deal if you break the sandstone, you can see it breaks into bricks. It's really the mortar that's the magic of this building. Because at 2 years old, we're stacking blocks already, right? That's something that humans know how to do pretty quickly. But it's really the mortar that's magic. So, I just saw a show on Hulu recently in a place called Caracol in Belize. Anybody see this show? It's called The Mayan Metropolis. And the story goes that there's this little tiny speck in the middle of the jungle in Belize called Caracol. It had one of these very large palaces and another outbuilding next to it, and they thought it was a relatively small thing. And they have modern technology now, which includes LiDAR and drones. And they basically flew over Caracol and they eliminated all of the jungle from the story. And what they discovered was that over 100,000 people lived in this little speck in the jungle at the same time in 600 acres. And I honestly believe, having walked many of these canyons here, and I've been in many of these paths, and I've seen dwellings everywhere. And I do mean every one of these canyons has it, bottom, middle, top, everywhere in this forest, okay? I believe that there were a lot of people living here at one time, and that this is just a neighborhood. And then I think if we were to take a big fan or LiDAR or whatever we wanted to do, and we would go out there, we would find all these ovals that used to be pit houses all over this desert. I can totally see it in my mind's eye, and I could, again, I'm making this up, honestly, but I can feel it. I can just feel the presence of a lot of people in a place like this. So what's interesting for me is this happened after 500 years of living below. They lived here for 800 years, but they waited 500 years to do this. So something must have driven them up the hill. We don't know what that is, okay? When you look out that way, you can guess that it might have had something to do with defense. The problem with the defensible position that's elevated is that when you run...
Okay, we're up here and you can see all the pictographs. A lot of them everywhere. Black and white.
Well, and then
The young ranger went to walk with him. He's not real steady on these rocks.
Oh, okay. The thing you got to understand about these things is that all of these people, going all the way back to the Archaeans, would grind up rocks and berries and bugs and all kinds of things into a powder. Then they would mix that powder with animal fat from their cooking fires. So it's all oil paint. These pictographs around the bottom here are new. And they show you kind of how bright these pictographs on the wall used to be when they were new. And what we did is we had an artist in Sedona mix her pigments just exactly like I described and paint them for us. And now they're taking part in our dust study. So if we go back to this wall here, this is a Sedona solar calendar. There's a sun or a moon here, and this is a mountain range. And there's some little black pointers underneath some of these mountain peaks. Really hard to see. Okay, so kind of picture that in your mind and turn around here, and there's that mountain range. It's a mirror image, so now when I'm facing this way, the White Mountains are on my left. And when the sun comes up over this first peak over here, it's about December 21st. Winter solstice. They know when it comes up over here, that's as far south as the sun's gonna go, and it's gonna start getting warmer because the sun's gonna start moving back over this way. And you can only see that from right here. You can't see it from the dwelling in any place else. It doesn't look the same. So then as I work my way back around here's
All right, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, share, subscribe. How many more videos do we have of what we did this spring?
Well, we'll probably have one more Sedona one, and then
The one home.
on the way home, probably that could probably be 2.
Yeah, so we probably got 3 more videos, and then we'll do the renovation video. It'll probably be December.
I
so.
hope.
Well, we'll be
on the road.
well. We're going to be done by we're leaving
hope
after
yeah.
Thanksgiving, so we'll fit them all in. We may be able to start them every 2 weeks again up once we're on the road and get more content. So, all right, remember, God loves you, but only Jesus can save you.
Yeah.